Should white people be scared of you?
No, I don't think they should be scared, but I think they should be aware that they have a lot of privilege and power, and they should use that to benefit people of color and the poor. And also, I think they should realize that their lifestyle is not the standard. That there are many cultures, there are many shades of brown and black and yellow, and really we need to co-create a new way of being with each other. And one of the ways to do that is to tear down this wall. So I'm Jerry Maynard. I am the regional organizer for Campaign Nonviolence. I'm here to be in witness and solidarity with my brown family on both sides of the border and to attend the workshops here at the SOAW Border Convergence.
Hey, I'm Maggie Martin. I'm one of the co-directors of About Face Veterans Against War. We sent a delegation here in solidarity with the SOA Watch and the border communities to really draw attention to the militarization of the border walls that are being expanded, and to really connect kind of human to human with the struggle that's happening here.
Building walls to block our way! Building walls to block our way! Immigrants dying every day! Immigrants dying every day!
Well, we destabilize these nations. We destabilize, the majority of Central South America through Panama, all the way down south. And then people who are falling victim to that destabilization come north. I mean, they come to the United States looking for safety and security. They come here looking for, refugee status. And then they're met with this wall, and they're turned back around and shipped back to the nations that we created the conflicts initially.
As American veterans, we feel a responsibility for what we've been involved in, whatever way we've been involved in it, and feel a responsibility to try to reverse the course of the American empire. And so that's what we're doing here today, and it's not that we are there because of what the local governments are doing, it's because we're there because of what our government is doing and our efforts to turn that around.
Yeah, we're here with Deported Veterans to raise this issue with people in the United States, that the United States government recruits people from other countries and then puts them out into the military, and they do the job that the U.S. government asks them to do, and then many of them are deported. Deported, just picked up off the street, and if they have violations of traffic violations, if by chance they've been, as many veterans are, whether you're from the United States or Mexico or Guatemala or wherever they're recruited from, the war causes them PTSD, and then many people have committed minor offenses, some of them major, but most of these are minor offenses that these veterans have committed in the United States, and then they're deported after serving in the U.S. military. Many of them promised that they would become American citizens, but that has not come true. Many of them have very serious medical problems, both physical and mental problems, and all caused because they volunteered to help America out on these crazy wars. We certainly don't want our own people volunteering for this, but for these people from other countries that have volunteered, and then they are treated so badly by the U.S. government. That's one of the reasons that we're here. So as a Veteran for Peace, and Veterans for Peace's newest chapter is for deported veterans in Tijuana.
Thank you all for being here.
Ha sido un placer construir este proceso colectivo de derrumbar muros.
It's been wonderful to do this collective process of tearing down walls.
Y construir al pueblo.
And to bring up the people.
Oh, my name's Hector Lopez. I'm an honorably discharged U.S. military veteran that has been deported to Mexico. It's not about being over there illegally, and it's not about breaking the law. It's about what's right. And what's right is not just me, all the veterans, we all deserve our benefits because we rightfully earn them with our service. And a lot of guys are really hurting really bad. A lot of guys have severe depressions. Their PTSD symptoms seem to re-aggravate every time something like this happens because we're Americans. I was only born in Mexico. I'm an American. and I want to go back to my country where, where my family is. All my kids are in the United States, my mom, all my family. I'm an American. I was just born in Mexico. And I think that if I'm good enough to die for the United States, I think I'm damn well good enough to live in the United States.
No borders, no walls, no war. That was a great little video on the action in Nogales. Veterans for Peace was down there, so was IVAW, and a number of SOA Watch, all down there on the border to protest against the walls. And there's a whole history behind it, and the video gave you some of the ideas that there. I also, before we get started, and we have a great guest on the program today, Ryan Holleran, an Iraq veteran, Army veteran. But I've been involved in a number of different issues recently, and one of those issues we have on our board, the National Board of Veterans for Peace, is Monisha Rios, who's Puerto Rican and from Vieques. She has family members there, and after Hurricane Maria, the devastation that took place on both in the Virgin Islands and in Puerto Rico, have just left the place decimated, and so we're really worried about the people there. VFP had put together a little statement that's kind of going. It's a draft right now, but it's going to be coming out shortly, and I wanted to read that to you. Our mission statement says that we are dedicated to building a culture of peace, exposing the true cost of war and the healing wounds of war. With this in mind, Veterans for Peace stands in active solidarity with the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands. We are with you. We recognize and regret the military role in the United States government's historic ongoing colonial oppression of these uncorporated territories, resulting in abhorrent destruction of the land and its peoples. We see and feel the deadly impact of the federal, state, local corruption, punitive response, and outright neglect in the struggles to survive back-to-back natural disasters. We demand that the government officials, aid workers at all levels, as well as citizens who are acting against efforts to sustain life, cease and desist. You do not have to do this. You can make a difference. We demand the government, aid workers at all levels, as well as citizens who are acting against these efforts. I already read that, sorry. We call on the military and law enforcement personnel to disobey unlawful, unethical, and inhumane orders. You do not have to follow. You can lead in the right direction. And when we talk about veterans, GI resistors have learned to disobey orders because they have a higher call, a higher moral compass. And we are under our own code of conduct required to make sure that those orders are legal and that we do not, like the Germans during the Nazi era or any military at that time, that use I was only obeying orders. So we want people to recognize what that kind of resistance means and what we're talking about. We echo the United Nations in its call on the United States government to remove regulatory and financial barriers to reconstruction and recovery, guided by international human rights standards. We commend the many aid organizations and self-organized groups of people, from small towns to community groups to water protectors from Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, who are working hard on the ground to alleviate the suffering in the aftermath of the hurricanes, and continue to support those efforts is much needed, and we want you to be a part of that. We extend our gratitude to the news media outlets that continue ethical reporting on the struggle for relief and invite more to do the same. More attention is needed in Vieques, struggle for relief, and invite more to do the same. More attention is needed in Vieques and Calubra and the U.S. Virgin Islands. We invite our members, Veterans for Peace, along with other peoples of the global community, to be kind bystanders who intervene, to be kind allies who listen and learn and respond culturally in respectful ways. We ask that you that you be with us as we actionably engage the truth of modern colonial oppression in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Now, I have another friend who goes by the name of Tony O, who, when this began, he came to me and we sat down and talked. And he says, you know, he lived in St. Thomas for a number of years, and he was really concerned about it, and he wanted to help the people there that were struggling in the Virgin Islands and the aftermath. He couldn't even reach people at the time. And so he got online, and he's sort of a computer genius in some ways, and he reached out to people in the community and contacted One Love Collective, and they worked together to create funding for the Virgin Islands. And I had a conversation with him today on Messenger, and I was telling Tony I was doing my program, and I wanted to know, you know, what's going on. He said, and I said, have you had any progress that you can share with me that I can share with the audience today? He says, hey, Dan, yeah, I talked with Monisha. Monisha is our board member who's Puerto Rican, and a couple of times, and she's really cool. I share a few Puerto Rican contacts with her, and I'll reach out to her again. And he wanted to know if she had heard anything from her family, and she's been struggling with her family a lot. There's still trouble with the communications on the island. She's lost contact with some people, and she's really worried. I mean, I've sat with her when it's so emotional when you're dealing with life and death situations, and I think people need to understand that. So I was asking him about One Love Collective. Have you gotten your donations onto the island and distributed to those in need? He goes, yep. In the Virgin Islands is moving quickly through recovery. They're moving quickly and getting power restored. Lots of folks who still don't have roofs and stuff. They're doing the blue tarp over their buildings in order to be able to have shelter. But in general, they're in a much better shape than Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is being really screwed by Trump and the U.S. government, and that's something to keep in mind. And I sent him a little message because I saw a program recently with, if people know Anthony Bourdain, who does a program, Parts Unknown. He's a chef who goes around the world and talks to people, but he has a real good sense of the community, and he gets in and talks to people, and he gets political in his shows, so he was interviewing people in Puerto Rico. He had a wonderful show just recently in which he was talking to people in tears because they couldn't get out to certain areas that people really needed. Well, other people in the community were rallying around in their own collectives because of the failure of certain organizations to be able to do anything, in our U.S. military to do anything. And they were creating food and trying to get it out to people. So it's people that are doing something. If you've listened to Trump, you've heard him say, oh, they're not doing anything for themselves. Well, they're doing it very much organizing for themselves and trying to help people. But there's only so much you can do if you don't have the supplies. You can't get down. Bridges have been cut. When I was in the military, we had engineers who would come through and build a bridge in a day, and you can get through there. And I know they can do that. So that is, the Seabees would come by and do that. And these are things that I think need to be done and can be done if they have, the initiative from the heads of our government to say this needs to be done. They're going to get it done. That's how it works. So he said he'd like to see it. He hadn't seen it. He heard about it. I asked him, what should we share with people? He says, well, there's a lot of wisdom that I think is going on that's important for the future. We don't do anything about if we don't do anything about climate change, we can expect these kinds of storms more and more. And so it's going to be important that communities in these highly remote islands are able to empower themselves. So I'm spending a lot of time reflecting on what went right and what went wrong to see if there's any useful, anything useful for those communities in the future. And I asked him about a friend of mine who was a vet who does emergency work he's done in Africa and Latin America and various places, and he said, yeah, they've talked together a number of times. He gave him a lot of useful information. And then, one of the things he was talking about, it's been so hard for him to deal with these issues. He felt like he was overwhelmed. But then he says all of a sudden it seemed like there were lots of people who really cared, and a lot of people who were willing to really help. And there was something that was really positive that I've taken from this, and that's to remember that when people come together and organize on these things, that real things can happen, real people come together. I believe most of the people in this country and around the world are good people, and that's always the thing to keep in mind. And when these disasters happen, they come out of the woodworks to help people. He says, he hopes he can figure out ways to help communities more directly and ways for them to help themselves. The problem is getting through the gatekeepers, the politicians, and the government. It will have to go a long way, so we need to organize and find ways around this. We had some nonprofits. I was asking about Puerto Rico and directly, and he was saying they had some people that were very amazing and helping, and some who felt that they were just getting in the way. So again, it depends on who you're working with. People feel like you're stepping on their toes. If you have real skills, that's important. Otherwise, you are getting in the way. That happens. If there's one thing he said to stress to your audience, it should be that with the internet communities having amazing ways to directly help each other in a distance, we have as much of a factor like I didn't in the past. We have to get the framework in place to make it possible to sidestep the gatekeepers. And the reason he's talking about that is with the FCC coming up in recent voting, they're talking about getting rid of internet neutrality, which means that why are they doing this? Well, they're going to charge more money for corporations for the fast lane. That also is without regulations, your privacy and your activities to try and organize around things that are important like this are going to be censored and watched and controlled at who sends the message. And as organizers, fighting against war, struggling for social justice in our community, these tools may be drastically hindered, and we have to find ways in which we can make these ways that we can bring citizens around. He says that we need a citizens' internet, which is one thing that he's doing a lot of research on right now. Citizens' internet that is not glorified shopping mall, So let's think about it from that way. I just wanted to give a shout out to Tony, because he's done such great work. He's working with our board member, and I wanted Monisha wanted me to read that statement, which I did. She also gave me a couple of places. You might want to put up some of those the links that I was talking about on how people can get involved. There's the Para la Naturaleza organization that's doing work on relief. There's another organization also called the Maria Fund. We don't have that up here, but it's something you can Google and check out. There's also the One Love Collective that Tony is involved in, and they're doing great work, and they do a lot of disaster relief work and other community work. So it's very important for people to get connected. This is one way of being the people's internet. And so right now, those are some ways to deal with. Monisha also said, one of the problems of getting some of the aid out to people is the Jones Act. Now, there are two different Jones Acts. The Jones Act of 1917 is not the one you want to tell them to stop, because that is the one that actually gives citizenship to the Puerto Ricans and the other islands under U.S. territories. But the other one is the Jones Act of 1920, which basically deals with a federal statute that provides the maintenance of the American mercantile or merchant marines. And that is the one that's stopping aid going through there, where people have to come to the U.S., drop it off with them, and then they ship it there. And then how that gets held up, we don't know. There's a lot of bureaucracy. I wanted to mention that. I think it's important for people to know. And then and you just saw that video, which is dealing with this the demonstrations SOA watched down in Nogales. You saw Hector Lopez, who is a deported veteran. This is a big deal. It's also a VFP chapter in Tijuana that we have there with the deported veterans. I also just came back from recently with Zahid Chaudhry, who is a disabled veteran, been in this country, I think, 16 years or longer, married to an American woman, is discharged from with an honorable from the military, and he was injured while he was in the military, so he's in a wheelchair, disabled, can't get around like anybody else, like the rest of people. He wasn't done through action in war, but he's still, and he gets benefits from the VA. And the immigration has been trying to deport him for almost 15 years. And they've denied him citizenship. He's got a lawsuit out there trying to stop, to get his citizenship, because it's when you join the military as a immigrant in this country or from a foreign country, there's sort of a guarantee that you can become a U.S. citizen. And that is not happening for everybody. And actually Trump is taking that away from people. And people that are even in transition right now may not even have those opportunities available to them. But I was just at a hearing that was supposed to be his last hearing. I was up in Olympia. The trial was up in Seattle. And what happened there was that the government was supposed to finish up with just turning in some paperwork. The judge was going to make a decision, but what happened, the government didn't have that paperwork ready. The judge was very angry, kicked everybody out of the courtroom, went out, came back, admonished the ICE attorneys and Homeland Security, who was also there, and said that they're going to that they should have at least called people to let them know that they didn't have the stuff ready, and he could have moved the trial date to another time. But instead they didn't do that. So he has moved his next hearing up to, I think it is, oh geez, I can't remember now. I thought it was January 12th or March 12th. I think it's March 12th. But it'll be coming up, and I'll be putting it out on Veterans for Peace through my website and others to let people know what's going on. But there's no reason why a veteran who served honorably in this country should be in a position of being deported. We feel, since he came from Pakistan, had a Muslim name, that he's being profiled as a Muslim, and they're trying to ship him out. I think people need to be aware of that. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty of this show. Ryan is a friend. Ryan, I want to thank you for being here. We saw a little bit of you on there, so you're a star. but Ryan's little bio that I pulled off the internet. He was born in California, enlisted in the Army Infantry out of Portland, amazingly, in October 2010. He was deployed for 10 months in Iraq in 2011. He spoke against the military while in active duty, and first through Under the Hood Cafe and Outreach Center as a member of the Iraq Veterans Against the War. Now Ryan is both an Iraq veteran with About Face now, is what they call themselves, About Face, formerly Iraq Veterans Against the War, and also with Veterans for Peace. and we've actually gone into schools and spoke together in the high schools here in Portland. He's also involved recently in creating the GI Hotline, a basic node here in Portland, in which he's training people and they're talking to people that come through it, and we wanted to get into that a little bit. He also facilitates a monthly workshop of warrior riders at the American Legion Post 134, which is off of about 2104 Northeast Alberta Street. And so there's a lot to talk about here. And I know one thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about before we get going too far is your military service. So where did you serve when you were in Iraq?
We were deployed to Maysan province, which is in the southeast side of Iraq, outside of a city called Al Amara.
And while you were there, can you tell me a little bit about your experience? What got you to change and speak out against it?
Sure. So when I was out there, it was kind of the last leg of the major surges in 2011. We were focusing on smuggling disruption and basically just defending the base that we were at, Cos Gary Owen, Combat Outpost Station Gary Owen. So a lot of times we were actually just driving in circles. We were just kind of holding security while they were pulling smaller bases in and then collapsing us into another base, and until we got to Kuwait, basically. So when we were doing those routes in 2011, as you might remember, it was Occupy movement was in full swing, and we'd be on patrol, and I'd be listening to podcasts, actually. So I was listening to what people were saying over here, what people were talking about stateside, and a lot of that made sense to me at the time. And I also realized that that the people of Iraq, they become humanized when you're that close contact, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to dehumanize somebody when you're in basic training and when you have all this other conditioning, but when you're face to face with the children and the families, and I remember coming to this realization that if I had seen an occupying force that looked nothing like me and spoke a different language in my backyard every day, and if that occupying force had killed my family, my uncles and my father, and I had a moment of being able to relate to the people who were attacking us, and that kind of sliced through a lot of the rhetoric that was necessary to train a killer. So in an infantry unit, we were going through a lot, and I really couldn't understand why.
Yeah. So when you started speaking out while you were in service, so were there repercussions when you were doing that?
Yeah, strangely enough, no.
Is that right?
Yeah, there wasn't a ton.
You have people joining you in that?
Not in my unit. In the infantry, they're pretty hard. They're pretty. It's an old boys club. I think my relationship with these big organizations, Veterans for Peace, and I think they knew I had the support of Under the Hood Cafe. So there was a series of these cafes that were outside of military bases.
Let's talk about these were the GI coffee houses that were going on, and that is a tradition that came from the Vietnam War.
Yeah, that's right.
GI coffee houses.
Yeah, so there was one outside of Fort Hood in the 70s called the Oleo Strut.
Right. Yes.
Named after, I think it was the mechanism in the landing gear that took the stress off of the landing of a helicopter.
That's right.
And so that was a place that cultivated a lot of resistance, with the draftees and a lot of the service members during Vietnam. Under the Hood Cafe did the same for service members in, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And then they started to kind of die down, the coffee houses around, and you went on tour with a group of people, even Micah from Germany, who had a coffee house in Germany, right?
Yeah.
And she was on that tour.
Yeah, the Clearing Barrel in Germany.
Yeah.
We had one out here in the Northwest called Coffee Strong for the longest time, outside at Joint Base Lewis McChord. And they did a lot to cultivate dissent. You know, they would catch the service members who had fallen through the cracks. They would give them a platform to speak, a safe place to go, and it did a lot, you know, to support me and kind of, you know, get me through those hard times where I wasn't relating to. I couldn't understand why nobody else was kind of feeling what I was feeling, and it gave me a place to relate to other people and feel like I really wasn't alone.
And then you were on the board there for a while too, right?
Yeah, I served on the board. I was a volunteer organizer, and then eventually when I was discharged from the Army, I became a member of the board for Under the Hood. So
did you feel experience sort of post-traumatic stress from your military service?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, it's still kind of coming to terms and understanding how it's affecting me on like a daily basis. Back then it was very real and very hard to see myself even. You know, it's kind of funny, the Warrior Riders found me 2 months after I got back.
Is that right?
So all of these things were kind of happening at the same time. You know, the GI Rights Hotline was instrumental in providing us with the training. You know, when I was speaking out, they told me what lines I could walk. You know, they told me what the regulation was. You know, not to wear my uniform when I'm speaking out, not to speak out during work hours. You know, certain ways that I could and could not criticize my command. And so it's kind of full circle. You know, a lot of these organizations did a lot to support me when I really needed it. So now I'm given the opportunity to do the same. And
you're giving back. That's great. Now, talk about Warrior Riders. Who are they? What do they do exactly?
Warrior Riders facilitates workshops for active duty service members, veterans, and their families. I mean, I had a beautiful experience. You know, when the month or two when I came back, I had a lot of feelings. I had a lot of, you know, without really the words to be able to put to it. And Warrior Riders didn't necessarily give me the words, but they helped me build this space to find my own. Mm-hmm. Actually, some of the poems that I wrote that first month back were in this anthology here, and it was really beautiful.
Let's show people the. See if you can see this. This is one of their anthologies. Let's hold that up there. Yeah, Warrior Riders.
Yeah, I think Aaron Hughes drew the cover for that.
I know also Combat Papers has worked with them, and a lot of their artwork is also employed in these stories.
I had a chance to go with Warrior Riders and Combat Paper into Bethesda, Walter Reed Hospital. This was just last year, I think. So we take workshops in, and we take service members, and they cut their uniforms up, and we pulp them down and turn it into paper. And at the same time, we're doing a week of workshops where they get to write, develop, you know, their poetry, develop their craft to some degree, and then find some visual way to represent that on the combat paper of the uniforms that they wore. So we were dealing with a lot of, you know, severely injured service members, multiple deployments, visible and non-visible injuries. So that was a pretty powerful experience to have. You know, yeah, I mean, the work that we're doing out here, we don't have an active duty base that's, you know, super close to Portland. You know, I think we have, like I said, Joint Base Lewis McChord up by Tacoma. You know, I would love to bring the workshops up to soldiers up there.
Well, we do have a VA hospital here, though.
We do, and we have a lot of veterans.
And we have a lot of veterans, that's right. I'm just thinking about Walter Reed. The VA system is under attack also from, well, you know, the privatization issue. They're trying to privatize our VA healthcare system, which is a real shame. And just recently here at Veterans for Peace, we created a workshop. In my last meeting I was in, we were talking about approving this workshop for Save the VA working group. Yeah. And Buzz Davis out of Arizona chapter actually got together and put together a plan and reached out to labor unions across the country near the VA system. And during Armistice Day, when you were down in Nogales at that time, I couldn't go to this. They have the Veterans Parade here in Hollywood, and it was going on at the same time we were doing our little action at Pioneer Square. But I ran out after we were done. I ran over there, and I just caught the organizers, and they had a banner with Veterans for Peace, Save the VA, and I got a picture with myself and them. I didn't bring that, but I had that, and it was really powerful. But what I really loved was seeing the labor unions getting behind this, and Veterans for Peace taking a strong position and moving forward to save the VA. This is something that is going to be an ongoing campaign, so people in the local area know that you should get involved. If you're a veteran,
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter what your politics is. We all have a common ground in protecting our health care and other veterans that need the treatment. So this is something that people can get involved in. I'm going to try and bring some of the local union people here to speak on the program sometime here in the near future,
great.
which would be great to have, and we can talk about other plans and where we go from there. But basically that's getting out there and talking to people, protecting the VA, the people that are injured, seeing that people care about them, because oftentimes people are isolated and they forget family. They get lost from family. They get up there, they're in the hospital, nobody's coming to visit. We need people being sure that they know that people care and that we care for them.
Yeah, it's important to remember that I think the healthcare providers, the mental health care providers, the doctors, the nurses, they're trying the best they can. They're doing the best they can with what they've got, and unfortunately, the system isn't providing them with much.
That's right.
And so they're just as invested in seeing a better healthcare system that's taking care of veterans in the best way possible as the veterans want to be taken care of. But like you said, the Vet Choice program is just another way to kind of divert those resources. Instead of having veterans go to doctors outside of the network, why don't we just hire more doctors and the veterans?
That is it, exactly. So that's important, and I'm glad, that you're involved in all of these things. So the GI Hotline, let's talk a little bit about that and what you're doing here locally.
Yeah, the hotline provides, counseling and advice. I'm a counselor myself. To service members when they call. There's this phenomenon that happens in the service in all branches, National Guard, Reserve, active duty, where there's this dual agency, where the legal support that a service member would usually receive, those lawyers and those attorneys actually have a loyalty to the command structure. More so than they do the service member. So a lot of times when someone's dealing with harassment, military sexual trauma, what I find to be just as important is when somebody's attempting to file for conscientious objector, and when they have those moments of conscience, or the avenues are not provided to them. The process to file for CO status is so complicated, intentionally so, I think.
CO status, you got to explain that to people.
Conscientious objector.
Yeah.
So if there is a clause where if a service member, if a soldier decides that what they're doing is unjust, if it speaks against their conscience, then they can't be forced to do that. I think people will think it's easiest to think of Quakers or the American Friends Services Committee, pacifist religions. Which is fair and makes sense. But unfortunately, people who are trying to, take advantage of those avenues don't have the resources they need to do so. So we take those calls.
And what if if it's not a religious thing, it's a moral issue? How does that work?
It doesn't necessarily need to be a religious conviction.
Because it used to be. It used
That's
to
right.
be that way, so that's changed.
Yeah. And that process is very complicated. We're trying to get more counselors to take calls. That process of there's a Center for Conscience in War in D.C., which is basically 1/3 of our organization of the GI Rights Hotline, and they do kind of that nitty-gritty. That takes a lot of work. They've got people who are super invested into it. So rather than actually me doing the one that's like filing those claims, which maybe someday I'll get there, we can push them off to our folks at CCW, which is the Center for Conscience in War. And they help people get out, And even before then, a lot of people have this moment of conscience and they don't even know what it is. They find themselves conflicted with what they're doing and they just leave. They go absent without leave.
Yeah.
And so even a larger percentage of our calls than actually getting CO is people who are just gone. You know, they were scared. They didn't want to do what they were doing anymore. They didn't want to have to go back to these unjust wars. Maybe they didn't have the words to express it. But you know, we kind of help them find. You know, well, we provide the options. You know, we're not a legal service. We don't tell people what to do. But we're definitely familiar with the military regulations and can kind of tell people what would happen if they did X, Y, Z.
So if I called you up and I said, "Hey, I've got a problem. You know, I've been AWOL now for 16, 17 days, and you know, what do I don't want to go to the brig. But I just can't go back to the Army anymore. I mean, I think I don't want to be a killer.
Yeah.
I don't want to kill anybody. I've seen that shit happen already, and I'm sick and tired of it. So, you know, what can I do?"
Well, I would say I completely understand. You know, depending on what branch you're in, you know, a lot of people would turn themselves, if they're already absent without leave. I mean, I've taken calls, I think just this last week, there was a guy who's driving on base, and he said, you know, what happens if I turn around right now? He's like, I can't do this one more day. And what happens if I turn around right now? You know, in that case, once a person is absent without leave for 60 days, they typically fall off the rolls of their unit. If they turn themselves in before that time, they'll most likely be returned, well, they will be returned back to their unit. And with the military culture and the ways that people are treated, that could be a hard option. We find people deal with a lot of harassment if that's the case. And if a person manages to stay away for 60 days, a warrant will be issued for their arrest, in which case they can turn themselves into a turn-in station. You know, each branch has a different spot. But if you wait 60 days, you turn yourself into this place, you'll most likely be discharged out of the Army within 30. So there's these avenues that people aren't really familiar with, you know, and just
So they're
understanding.
not just locking people up like they used to?
No, I mean, well, and it depends, right? Like, I'm not giving advice, you know. If you have orders to deploy, you know, that's a different case. If you've already had a history of misconduct, which is often the case, you know, when people are suffering from PTSD, they fail to meet formation, they have, you know, substance-related issues. So, you know, it's all on a case-to-case basis. But there are these options where, you know, the suicide rate is incredibly high in the service. You know, it's 1 a day for a relatively small...
But you're not a suicide hotline, or are you?
We're not a suicide hotline. I mean, I would definitely tell people to find, you know, there's the Veteran Suicide Hotline that I think does a much better job than we can. We work with an organization called the Civilian Medical Resource Network, where we can get somebody in touch with some mental health. Yeah, I think when people feel like they don't have a way out, they will take that final one. So before people actually get there, we just try to provide people with some options, you know, and let them know that the military would like you to think that you don't have any options, that, you know, their way is the right way, it's the only way. That's not the case.
Well, you have people that have gone up to Canada too. I mean, they've literally left. They've been deserters per se, and
Sure.
they go up there. They try to find sanctuary. During the Harper administration up in Canada, they were trying to deport a lot of people back here to the U.S. But that's kind of changed, or is in limbo right now. Although there's a strong element still with that in certain communities that are trying to force people back.
I mean, you know, if there was a call I was taking, I would say a person has quite a few options before that would actually
happen.
They've got a lot of options, right? All we can do is put the cards on the table.
Yeah.
And, you know, like I said, a lot of people don't know that if they're simply gone, drop off the roles of their unit, turn themselves into the turn-in stations, and they could be released with an administrative discharge. That's not even a dishonorable discharge. You know, they can still receive some benefits with that. So, I mean, those are options that obviously the military is not going to advocate for. You know, they're not going to tell you that this is the way things actually function. And so it's kind of beautiful to be able to, you know, tell people that these options exist, and hear the excitement in their voice when they realize that, you know, yeah, they got a way out.
So it's sort of know your rights kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people were getting, it's kind of complicated because a lot of service members were getting pushed out, right? They came back, they have DUIs, they're drinking, they're using drugs, they have issues with violence, they get arrested. And a lot of these cases, the command structure, when we started drawing down after the surges, the Department of Defense said we don't need nearly as many service members. So they were kicking these guys out left and right. And unfortunately, they were kicking them out with dishonorable discharges or negative discharges where they wouldn't get the benefits. And so they come back, they're struggling to adapt, they're struggling to manage to heal from their trauma from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they get kicked out without any access to the VA.
So how many calls do you take during, how many, you do this so many days a week?
Yeah, I take 2 shifts a week right now.
2 shifts a week, and you have people that are volunteering, and you're training them also, aren't you?
Yeah, we're training a handful of folks. I mean, we're definitely looking for more people who are interested in being counselors. A person doesn't need a background in law. They also don't need to be a veteran. Either one of those things helps, obviously. It can be kind of a steep training process. The total calls that the hotline takes, I tried to do some math this morning, and I think it was about 5,000 calls in this year so far, which is pretty significant. I'll take, and each call can vary too, right? If somebody needs a little bit more attention, I can end up spending a few hours on the phone with a single person. Other times, and while I'm on the phone with that one person, I see their phone ringing constantly. So there's a need for more chapters, for more nodes, and there's definitely a need for more counselors.
How many are there across the country, do you know?
Active nodes, I mean, we have Center for Conscience and War in D.C., we have a Quaker House in Fayetteville, and San Francisco takes calls on Sunday. Right now we're down to 6 nodes. Out of those 6, there's 3 major ones, which is very different than, say, 5 years ago when I was in, and there was 3 times as many. So there's definitely been a loss of counselors, and there's there's a need.
So how do people get involved?
Well, if you're in the area, I mean.
You got a number there?
Fantastic! Yeah, you can call the number there on the screen. My name is Ryan Hollering. We can start to evaluate whether or not it would be a good fit to be a counselor, but we can start training. A lot of these hotlines existed long before we had any kind of training protocol. I mean, during the surges and during the initial invasion of Iraq, even here in Portland, there was a node that started out of Lewis and Clark Law School, and there was a handful of law students that just saw the need, and they started putting the word out there to Joint Base Lewis McChord, and people were calling. And back then, the GI Rights Hotline was kind of a regional thing, so you would take calls for whoever's closest. And now we have a national network, so I'll be taking calls from people in Georgia, Alaska, overseas. But I think it's most ideal if I'm going to be, if we have more nodes that are addressing those geographic areas, it's easier. So.
Plus, I mean, you've been doing this out of your home right now, and
yeah.
So just to let people know that one of the things is looking for a venue, a place that you can really kind of settle in. Maybe there's a church out there, school, or
Won't
something.
say no.
Just
Yeah.
offer up a office space that you could use and hook up. That would be nice, and then people can come in and you have various shifts to work on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the plug. Yeah. I mean, it's a low overhead. The phone network that we work through is like $35 a month. That as long as we have an internet service provider, we can plug into a modem, we can start taking calls. A person doesn't even need to be there. We have an app now that if you have a smartphone, we train you up on the hotline. You can actually be taking calls wherever you are.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you have a computer, if you have a phone, the app works on either. So that's been kind of a game changer for us. It's obviously preferred to have like a physical space where we can have people taking the calls and have some more accountability around it. But
do some people call and ask, what is IVAW or About Face or Veterans for Peace, or do they ever ask those kind of questions? Or?
Yeah, we get some. I mean, a lot of the conscientious objectors are curious to hear from other people that they can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, we definitely defer them. as counselors, we have to be pretty apolitical, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've had my experience that informs the way I'm going to counsel. I'm one of a few veterans who are actually counselors. I think I'm the only post 9/11 vet who's on. So it's really powerful for me to be able to relate to them,
Right.
And kind of push them toward organizations. But there are also federal laws that are against
sure.
advocating
Well,
somebody
you
to
can't
get
give
out.
legal advice. I mean, that's another,
Right.
you know. But I know that. I remember. I mean, we even had undergrounds going up to Canada. And
Yeah.
stuff, you know. But at the same time, you know, you can't say this. You can't give legal advice, but you can refer people to an attorney.
Yeah.
And that was how we would handle that.
Yeah, well, the Military Law Task Force, I mean, we have
Yes, exactly.
maybe 300 attorneys across the country who are willing to take cases specific to military law.
Yeah.
You know, I'm expecting a lot more with this trans ban.
Talking about that.
It was kind of a bait and switch, I feel like. You know, under the Obama administration, a lot of transgendered members, you know, felt empowered to kind of come out of the closet, you know, and at the time they were promised all of the medical access to transition. And then now under Trump, you know, I mean, we saw his tweets, right? His
Right.
transphobic, hateful tweets where he was blasting these people who had already come out, served multiple deployments. I mean, there's transgendered members from the entire spectrum, you know, from combat arms to officers, intel to being grunts. And all of these people are kind of, I mean, they're screwed for the lack of a better word. Well, we're going to find out more in February and March of this next year.
Yeah.
So the Department of Defense was ordered to come out with a process to kind of find a way to apply Trump's policies. However, their access to medical health care is going to be eliminated in March of this next year. So I'm expecting to get a lot of calls. You know, a lot of my queer brothers and sisters are going to be struggling. I mean, it makes me pretty mad. You know what I mean? It makes me pretty upset.
You know, I want to get down to SOA Watch. We're going to have only a few minutes, so I wanted to talk about. So let's tell me a little bit about SOA Watch and who are they? How they began?
School of the Americas.
School of the Americas.
Well, strangely enough, I mean, yeah, School of the Americas Watch. SOA Watch was organized to resist the training of militants from Central South America here in the United States at Fort Benning, the same place where I was trained. You know, I was trained they call it the home of the infantry, you know, where you learn, some pretty severe combat tactics. They were learning a lot of other things. They were learning how to terrorist tactics, or I guess it is terrorist, interrogation. They were learning psychological operations, counterintelligence operations. So what happened was we were training all these folks, and then they were being employed into regimes in Nicaragua, Guatemala, El Salvador, to usurp the people, you know, to fight against the people and fight for capitalist agendas that the United States held.
In fact, you know, that was during when I came back from Vietnam in the 1980s. I came back in '69, but in the 1980s, there was a major, the whole Central American conflicts that were going on. Really grabbed my heart. You know, we had refugees coming here, and I was part of the sanctuary movement at that time. And right now we have sanctuary cities that are under attack by the Trump administration again. But we had created them all across the country because people were fleeing from these people who had been trained at the School of the Americas that were really using terrorist tactics, death squads. Basically, killing people and putting them out there. People disappeared, and nobody knows what happened to them. Families are still looking for people.
Massacres and killing Americans as well, right?
As Americans. There were a number of nuns, and then Oscar Romero was killed.
Right.
In fact, we have a woman here who was a therapist who was down there. Her daughter was on the steps of the church that they rode up on their SUVs or Jeeps and ran over her arm and took her arm off, and she survived it. You know,
these are tactics that we trained them, and these are weapons that we sold them or gave to them.
Yeah.
And the thing that really troubles me is, so the School of the Americas used to be at Fort Benning, you know, and that's where You know, people were actually getting trained, and just recently it had moved to the border.
Yeah.
And what I don't understand is, you know, in the rhetoric, nobody seems to ask why are there so many migrants coming north.
Right.
You know, that the questions stop there, where nobody bothers to understand these people are coming from, you know, kind of like the video I said in the video, like these destabilized countries that are, you know, that we destabilize, and people are coming north looking for sanctuary, salvation.
That's right, and that's that's what people are fleeing, not only from war and disaster. You know, there's drug cartels, and it's poverty.
Yeah.
I mean, poverty should be a good reason. They're looking to, you know, NAFTA created a situation in Latin America, and especially in Mexico, which the poor farmers couldn't farm anymore, couldn't compete with our dumping of cheaper products and availability, and their families are starving and they need to find work, and that becomes a crime to find work and feed your family. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that, you know, Veterans for Peace, Iraq, About Face, and other groups, human rights groups, are down there and trying to stop this.
I mean, if U.S. intervention worked, it would have worked before now.
Yeah.
You know, we see ISIS in Iraq, and we see Venezuela in turmoil, and we just need to stop getting involved.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, we only have a few minutes left here, and like I said before, you know, you run out of time because there's so much to talk about.
Sure.
But are there some final words that you would like to relay to people?
Oh man, we covered so much.
I know.
I mean, I appreciate the statement that you read from Veterans for Peace earlier, you know, that we need to have a call to conscience for the service members, you know, that it is a law, you know, every service member has the right to disobey an unlawful order. And that if you're told to do something that you feel speaks against your conscience, you don't have to do it. You can call us at the GI Rights Hotline and we'll help you facilitate, you know, getting out, and you don't have to do things that you don't feel are right.
Well, so important. I'm so glad that you were able to come today, and I'm glad you're in Portland. So, you know, this makes it available for people. And they're you know, we have common ground with veterans. So if you're a veteran and want to help out, get involved with the Warrior Writers Workshop.
Yeah.
Again, on Sundays, the first Sunday of every month?
First Sunday every month, American Legion, 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock. Thank you very much, and
Thank you,
welcome again.
Yeah, it's been
Thank
great.
you.
Appreciate it.